Ekkin. Under ministration of the Emperor's brow, the royal couriers are an integral, if oft maligned, portion of the Emperor's household. Out of sight and mind they remain, the Emperor's ears which hear all within and without the mandates. Even so, the couriers, named for their chief obligation, oft lock horns with fair Calais protectors and the lectorials who oversee them, on account of both of their modest birth and similarity in duty of safeguarding the peace of the gods. From Xenthius Tiburcio's The Norrene Way, Book 2, Chapter 17. Like the soldier bee, Ekkin and his lieutenants spent the afternoon sharpening their stingers for war. While for arms they took the best they could muster, for armor they took more that which concealed than protected. Ekkin's was a cloak and shirt of dark linen, beneath which hid ring mail and splint plate. For arms he chose a thrusting dagger, one that would find the gaps in defenses as easily as a neck. It would serve him well should fortune fail him. And if it doesn't? Lady Carla had scolded him before their departure. What then? Frankly, dear sister, Ekkin had gritted his teeth, that will be your concern, not mine. The gods were good that evening, sending a herd of clouds down from the upper air to obscure the waning moons. As the sun finally yielded to a long twilight, Ekkin exited the Norrene palisade, crossed the ditches, the sharpened stakes hammered into the ground, and the pitfalls filled with even more, until he finally reached where the forest again grew thick to the camp southwest. There one of Lord Vulp's couriers waited for him atop the trampled earth, in the guise of any normal legionnaire. Somewhere nearby crows were gathering. Gadfly, Ekkin gave the code word between their caws. "We know who you are, Sir Helster," the courier replied. "Right this way." Under the trees it was dark. Through the gloom the spy led Ekkin to the withered remains of a blackened tree jutting out of the earth. Bruno and Valerius were already there, waiting. Dressed similarly to him, Ekkin's companion had on his back a massive claymore, its handle leopard brown and worn with use. Beneath his cloak, Ekkin could make out a pair of axes. "Captain?" Bruno greeted him in his smooth accent of Newhold, one shared among many other former colonies of Theiss. "You are late." Ekkin gritted his teeth. "On the contrary," the courier countered. "You were early, and Sir Helster has arrived just as he was wished. Same goes for you, Sir Muro." The man in question was leaning against an elm. As he got up, Ekkin bristled. Even without his plate, Ekkin felt like a stuffed hen, but Valerius moved nimbly as a wolf. By his hips swung a pair of sabers, and beneath his cloak were a set of throwing knives, their claws steel. "Guilty, good courier." Underneath his hood and mess of brown hair, Valerius was grinning. "Shall we?" "Overconfidence does not behoove your mission," the servant of the Empire responded. "By your success or failure, this war will be decided. Or the next stopped," Ekkin grimaced. If Farnaces arrived to a city already captured, he might prefer settlement to assault. The Emperor too, mayhaps. Ekkin could still hear his tears, quiet and bitter and heartbroken. Another minute of walking and he showed them their quarry, a small hole in the earth. To Ekkin it seemed little more than the den of a fox or mountain lion. He, however, knew differently. "You have until dawn," the courier motioned to the hole, "by which time you will be expected to have succeeded in your mission. And if we are late?" Bruno raised an eyebrow. The courier wrinkled his nose. "Then you will be presumed dead. If you do somehow find your way back, make sure not to be spotted. We will need enough facing the Aviri as is, and that is if the Emperor decides to fight. You will have him to answer to if you fail, not to mention Magisters Nox and Fury. Now, the hour's late, and I recommend you get going." Ekkin gritted his teeth. "Then why didn't you call us earlier?" So deep into the summer, true night would only be a handful of hours, the rest a gloom that twisted more than obscured. Torches in hand, the three joylessly descended into the root-gnarled earth. Going under the hill, Ekkin was at once hit by the dank smell of crypts, cellars, and all places he was loath to enter. Hearing their footsteps in the dark, Ekkin half thought they were drums, and, rather than where they were going, the three of them were instead venturing down into Dios' twilight halls. That made him shudder, until the earth gave way to ancient masonry supported by wooden beams long since gone to rot. "How about that?" Ekkin could hear Valerius grin. "The fox was right." "We should move faster," Ekkin urged as they went. "There's no telling what we're going to find. Lord Vulp said something about an old cistern, but nothing beyond that." Soon the path twisted like the spine of some gigantic snake. A few minutes later, it forked, or at least came to what had once been a fork. The other path, leading to their left, had long since collapsed. Seeing it, Ekkin thought of all the cities, maybe even countries' worth of stone over their heads, and how, should the tunnel collapse, their bodies might not be found for 1,000 generations. Ekkin gripped his torch until his fingers hurt. The three continued on again, only Valerius just as quickly stopped, and Ekkin bumped into him, having matched him step for step. "Watch it!" Ekkin hissed. "You watch it!" Valerius shot back. "What is it?" "Tracks." Valerius stepped aside for Ekkin to see. "Leading away from us. Recent, too." "The couriers?" Bruno asked. "Maybe." Valerius made a face. "I didn't see any before the fork, though. Did you?" When Bruno and Ekkin shook their heads, Valerius sighed. "Maybe they didn't leave tracks." He began walking again. "Either way, they're gone now." A few minutes later, they came to a wall. Seeing it, Ekkin's stomach grew taut as he feared hope had left him. "Strange." Valerius bent down to the tunnel's floor. "The tracks end here, and in circles at that. Were they dancing?" He turned to Ekkin. "What do you make of it, my lord?" Ekkin looked at the tracks, then the wall, the sound of blood in his ears. Then he felt a breeze. "It's a false wall," he finally said. "Built up against the cistern. It's probably a trap." "Order our way in?" Bruno strode past them and traced his leathery fingers against the bricks, tapping as he went. "This mortar is rotten. Look here, and here. This wall was put together hastily. One good shove and it should come down like a reed fortress." "An avalanche, more like." Ekkin wrinkled his nose. "Could you do it quietly?" Bruno flexed his fingers. "In time, yes." Using one of his axes, Bruno levered out one of the bricks near the top. Wriggling it back and forth, he deftly pried the brick loose. Although quiet, to Ekkin the scraping of stone and steel seemed almost deafening. One by one, Bruno pried the bricks loose, handed them to Valerius, Valerius to Ekkin, who then laid them to rest in neat piles along the tunnel's side. Bruno looked through the portal. "Empty," he noted, then let Ekkin have a look. On the other side was a prison, reeking of death and cavern dark, save for a series of light wells far above. Seeing the cages and cells carved into the chamber's walls, Ekkin could almost hear the voices of the dead calling out from the stone, lamenting that which they had lost. Off in the distance, up a winding staircase, was a crevice hewn into the rock. The way out. "No guards?" Valerius whispered as the three crept through the breach and into the prison. "They're probably above, past the crevice up ahead." Ekkin tried to push the smells of damp and rot and refuse from his mind. "Hopefully it's not locked," he added. "Captain." Bruno's voice boomed off the walls. "You might want to see this." Ekkin gritted his teeth, but followed nevertheless. Bruno stood before a cell, one he had passed by. Unlike the others, however, this one wasn't empty. Inside was what at first seemed a pile of clothes and straw. As Ekkin looked harder, though, from the pile emerged an arm, a leg, the outline of a man. "You think he—" "Maybe." Ekkin picked up a broken chip of pottery from the dungeon floor and readied to throw it through the bars. "Don't." Something inside him whispered, calling forth every story of the restless dead he had been told as a child, of drowned ghosts which lurked by the rivers, the blood-starved revenants of cursed kings, and seven-fingered liches whose breath cracked stone and whose touch was mortal. "That will not be necessary." A voice emerged from the cell and Ekkin froze. "You have sufficiently persuaded that you are not my imaginations." Ekkin turned to Bruno, picturing the look on his face. "Indeed." The figure lurched to life, their hands pale as marble. "I speak as I live, though in this place that can be hard to say for certain." "What are you doing?" Ekkin jumped again as another voice, Valerius's, hissed from behind his shoulder. "He's one of them. Kill him before he raises the alarm." "Me? Navrian?" The man chuckled, switching at once to high Norian flowing without accent. "I assure you I am anything but, and love is less mine than yours for that sort." Ekkin looked at the man in the cage, then to Valerius, then back to the man. "Who are you?" "A man of use." The prisoner pointed at the hole with a pale finger. "That leads to the Norian camp. It seems the attack last night did not go well for our friends in green, and that you are here, and so clothed. You tried to seize the city tonight, before the arrival of the Knights of Pharnaces, no?" Ekkin's jaw dropped. "How?" "And," the man continued, "the way you pronounce your words. You are from farther Circaia. He said it so matter-of-factly. No, do not tell me. A poch? No, you have far too much sense. I'd sooner be a corpse than a poch, Ekkin spat. I'm Sir Ekkin of the Helsterids. These are my lieutenants, Sirs. Tza! Valerius raised a hand. Don't give him our names! He peered at the man in the cell. Who are you? Some captured diplomat? A knight? One of Nox's couriers? Speak. Ekkin of the Helsterids, the man chuckled. Quite the lieutenant you have. Your name, Valerius hissed. Do as he says, Ekkin requested, if you would. The man in the cell raised his fingers. In the dim light, Ekkin now saw they were no dyer's fingers, yet still marble white, all save for his left pointer, right last, and right ring, each instead bearing his natural olive hue. The men above called me corpse hands, he stated flatly. Until last night, from which they have not called me anything. What about yourself? Ekkin asked. What do you answer to? The man shifted around in his seat. Something of no consequence. Ekkin nodded, aware of their leaking time. Yet there was something undeniably intriguing about this corpse hands, who he was and what he did. What happened then? He asked. Corpse hands scratched his tangled beard. There was once a guard, loved by some, who vanished 2 nights prior, smoke in a stiff breeze. I saw nothing. Nothing had been mine but muddy water for 4 days. Yesterday I had not even that, and so had to accustom myself to the taste of stone. Bruno raised an eyebrow. They did not ask about the man? Corpse hands shrugged. Mayhaps I was dead, lacking the waters of life. While down here, however, I heard them say they would hang the other guard as a co-conspirator. No one has been for me in a day. They might not even have bothered locking the door. Did not, if I heard correctly. Ekkin turned to the others, gauging their expressions. Absolutely not, said one. Why not? The other. As for himself, Ekkin didn't know what to make of him. He was undoubtedly clever. It might be of use, but his words, his hands. What about this? Ekkin turned back, and for the briefest moment, Corpsehand's eyes flickered with the red-gold sheen of true orichalcum, the same sheen as his own blade. Release me, and I will help you open the gates. These streets are known to me, and I am not unuseful in a fight. We never said it was our mission to open the gates, Valerius snapped. Truly? Corpsehand chuckled. Then, pray tell, what are 3 knights from the legions of His Grace Tychon Otho, the living saint, scion of old Myconiah, master of the sky and Altus, lord of the spires and over the earth, and defender of the faithful, doing sneaking into Green Navria under cover of darkness through an abandoned waterway? How did you know it was a waterway? Corpsehands craned his neck. If given its right, the sun yet shines deep beneath the earth, and reveals the countless cubits of water which have long afore smoothed these walls. History will vindicate me, should you so seek it. The man's silence said the rest. Ekkin had to choose. Captain, Bruno whispered. We should take him at his word. He is Norian, and keen as our most esteemed ancestors. He'll help us. Leave him, Valerius hissed. My lord, a man's speech betrays his character, and he is more rotten than any I've ever heard. He might help us now, but in his heart lies abomination. Abomination. That word did not come to Valerius' lips often, but on the other hand, the 3 of them might not even find the nearest wine sink, let alone a path to evade the guard. Ekkin looked at the man in the cage, and his spine went cold. We'll take him, Ekkin decided. Once we find the key. Valerius opened his mouth to speak, but closed it at Ekkin's glance. A minute later, they were at the crevice. Gritting his teeth, Ekkin began to squeeze his way through. As they progressed, Ekkin's heart began to thunder in his chest, thinking of what was soon to come. The flash of steel, the cry of rage, the color of blood. I have a sword. Ekkin touched his blade. My sword. One of the best in the world. I have my sword. The door was without handle, a wooden wall between stone. Breathing deeply, Ekkin pressed a gloved hand against the barrier and pushed. The hinges moaned and Ekkin's jaw tightened, cursing whatever engineer had worked it. Despite the noise, they pushed through. On the other side was a small barracks full of empty beds. In the corner was a fireplace. A soldier sat there, frying something away in a pan. Their back was turned, their shield and spear resting off to the side. Hamak? The Navrian tongue was still unfamiliar to Ekkin, but he thought the guard had said a name. By whose chance did... Wait, you're... Ekkin drove Fortune into the guard's gut with a shunk. Pulling the blade free, Ekkin watched as the blood welled from the wound and sizzled as it hit the hot stones. The man, however, did not die. Instead, he looked first at his wound, then his attacker, and raised his spatula in defense. Ekkin stabbed the man again, and he fell, hitting the ground with a soft thud. On the ground, he tried to yell, only for a gurgle of dark fluid to spurt from his mouth and dribble down his chin. He tried crawling towards his spear, but as he reached out, Ekkin lopped off his hand. Cloth and leather and flesh and bone were one to true orichalcum, and the severed limb landed in the fire next to the skillet. Ekkin stabbed the man again, then again, then again, in the thigh and back and abdomen and neck, but the man refused to die and instead flopped on the floor in an ever-growing pool of blood. Each breath a journey, the soldier turned himself over and looked Ekkin in the eye. Norian pig! The words burbled from his lip. Before he could finish, Fortune split his throat and the man spoke no more. Only then did Ekkin realize how heavily he was breathing, the blood on his clothes. It's done, Ekkin gasped, looking back at his friends. He's dead. A cold, sickening feeling then gripped him, one not unfamiliar, and Ekkin retched. When he had finished, he wiped his mouth, only to shudder in disgust when his lips tasted the dead man's blood. Bruno gave Ekkin a hand. Next time, he said, go for the heart. Or the head. Ekkin nodded numbly and took his companion's hand. Valerius barred the door, standing guard as Bruno rummaged through the dead man's belongings for the key to Corpse Hand's cell. Somewhere in the distance, Ekkin could hear the drip of Fortune's blade, the sizzling of skin as the whole room began to take the smell of pork. Here. Bruno handed Ekkin a mass of twisted iron fingers hanging off a blood-soaked rope. In Ekkin's grip, they were almost warm. We should head back. They found Corpse Hands exactly where they had left him. A man of your word. He smiled when Ekkin finally found the correct key. When the cage opened, he rose, the man's joints cracking as he stretched and finally turned to his savior. You've returned me to life, he said softly. For that I will repay you in honors many, until the gods have decided I have given enough. Thank you. Ekkin couldn't help but notice the malignity in his gut, even if he knew not from whence it came. Following Ekkin, Bruno, then Corpse Hands, then Valerius exited the dungeon. Once they reached the barracks, however, Corpse Hands shoved past Ekkin and dove towards the fireplace, a vulture to his prey. With pale fingers he raised from the skillet a slab of fried bread still dripping with grease and began to devour it. After several moments, Corpse Hands leaned back, a deep gurgling coming from his throat. Ekkin realized he was laughing. And to think, he breathed between laughs. Stale bread, what a delicacy compared to crickets and flies. He wrenched several rashers of bacon from the skillet and began devouring them too. Once he had finished, Corpse Hand scrambled over the dead man's body towards the table, snatched up another piece of bread, tore it into chunks, and began dredging them through the pan of hot grease. I told you, Valerius hissed into Ekkin's ear as he watched. There was something unnatural about that man. If Corpse Hands had heard, he paid him no mind. Instead, halfway through his bread, he rose and ran to the nearby cupboard. Where are you? He whispered until his hands closed around a small clay jar. Lifting the contents to his nose, he sighed and ran back to the fire. There he scooped amber honey gone to seed into the pan, mixed it with the remaining fat, and began to eat the two together. At some point he ran back to the table and downed a pitcher of what seemed to be watered wine. Beneath it all reeked the scent of the dead man's burning hand. At long last, Corpse Hand's eating slowed. Breathing deeply, he straightened his back and looked into the flames. I thank you for this meal. His words were poise. He then just as gracefully rose, the folds of his dingy robe as the wings of a bird bursting into flight. Turning towards them, before the hearth the man's eyes were pale brown flames, glinting in a way that knew much yet revealed little. I believe we have work to do. Corpse Hands extended an arm towards Valerius, joints cracking as he did. One of your swords, if you would. Valerius squeezed the saber against his left hip. Not on my life. Without so much as a look, Corpse Hands turned to the barracks door. Leave your torches. I know the way, and they will only draw attention. Outside, the dark of night swallowed them, punctuated only by the red glow of fire along the city's walls and buildings. They were on a narrow street of stone, the massive walls of green Navria to their back. There, Corpse Hands pointed left, leads to the main northern gate. That, he pointed opposite, leads to the western, from which will our men approach. Valerius wrinkled his nose. West, Ekkin said. The force are thicker there, and the Navrians less expect the attack from that edge. As your past two have come from the north. Corpse Hands glanced down at him. When Ekkin nodded, they were off. He clenched his teeth all the while, each step a lash in the dead of night. Not had they crossed 2 blocks when they ran into one of the nightly patrols. Back! Valerius motioned, and the 4 of them braced against the shadowy wall of a stuccoed house as the boots and sandals of half a dozen guards clomped closer. Don't turn this way. Ekkin silently prayed, gripping Fortune tight. Don't turn this way. They turned right, directly towards the 4 of them. The sword, Corpse Hands whispered. No, Valerius hissed. The guard's words were foreign to Ekkin, although he recognized some, like mellis root, broth, and quiet. With a start, he realized these men were Kirtari, mercenaries garbed in the arms and armor of their forlorn homeland. The guards barked back and forth, laughing, until their leader, a massive man whose pointed helmet contained a mane of rippling chest-length hair, motioned for them to stop. He turned, staring right to Ekkin and the others. Don't see us, Ekkin begged, hoping that their shadows and their torches would keep them hidden. Go on. The guard turned, and they continued on their way. A gasp of relief escaped Ekkin's mouth, but just as soon a crow cawed, and one of the guards in the rear turned, seeing first their cloaks, then their blades. Not a year older than Ekkin, he stammered something, and the captain followed his gaze. He barked a command, and the young mercenary began to run towards the northern gate. Valerius, go! Ekkin shouted. Take him down! The sword, Corpse Hands ordered. Valerius inhaled sharply, thrust one of his sabers towards Corpse Hands, and ran after the fleeing guard. It was now 3 on 5. Jumping away from the wall, Ekkin charged the captain, hoping against hope that his end might make Bruno and Corpse Hands work that much easier should they falter in their own duties. Ekkin raised his blade, red gold in the torchlight, as the song of steel on steel awoke from behind him. It's just one man. Ekkin gulped as the captain strode forward to accept his challenge. Of a height with Bruno, Ekkin wavered at the size of him, his grin and bull-strong frame as he unslung his weapon. It was a massive steel maul, and whereas leather and flesh were one to Fortune, stone in Ekkin's skull would be the same to it. If he hits my chest, Ekkin pictured himself flying backwards, shattering as many bones against the wall as would break beneath the strike itself. Ekkin dodged the first, countering with a swift stab to the man's arm. The true orichalcum bit through his mailed sleeve and drew blood, but Ekkin missed the tendons. The maul came in for a second swing. Ekkin ducked and slashed upwards at the man's wrist, but the captain parried the blow and backhanded Ekkin in turn. He's better than me. Ekkin staggered, red stars in his eyes. Only my blade's stronger. It's the only way I can win this. As the captain readied another swing, Ekkin saw Bruno was faring much better. His opponent's shield was a mass of splinters, though its bearer still stood. Turning back to his foe, Ekkin ran forward and feinted low, thereafter landing a deep gash in his enemy's shoulder. If Ekkin were taller, he would have killed him then, but at his height the slash was still fatal, if not immediately. Ekkin jumped back, but too slow, and the maul struck him square in the chest. Ekkin felt something crack and fell to a knee. He watched in horror as the mercenary raised his maul for one final blow, a soundless prayer on his lips to his god of wind and whispers. I was too slow, Ekkin thought as the maul descended. Sortira's embrace he however felt not, and Ekkin looked on as a sword sprouted from the side of the captain's neck. The captain's maul clattered to the ground, followed by their body. Ekkin gasped in pain as the corpse embraced him, then looked up. Bruno stood over him. Like I said, Bruno pointed to theirs with his own, the head. Him, Ekkin wheezed as he pushed the dead man off and scrambled to his feet, only to find the fight over. He and Bruno looked on as Corpse Hands pulled his saber from the back of a fallen guard, their two allies laying motionless next to them. Ekkin's jaw dropped. How did you... They fought well. Corpse Hands flicked the blood from his saber, but not well enough. In the distance, a pair of footsteps grew louder. It seems your legate has returned, Corpse Hands noted. Ekkin turned, seeing Valerius racing back towards them. Behind him was a sixth body, motionless on the street. Panting, Valerius eyed Ekkin, then Bruno, then Corpse Hands standing over his pile of bodies. Keep the sword, he spat.